Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tested. This is a very special live stream we're doing this week, where I, Norm, am joined by our Starfield build team here. We'll introduce everyone first. We got Kayte Sabaker, Sean Charlesworth, and Melho here. And this team put together this model in front of us, the Starfield. Give me 1 second. Sorry about the echo. There it goes. Hopefully all good there. This team put together the model in front of us, the Frontier model from Starfield. Apologize for the echo. Let's see if we're still getting any echo. Echo. All good? Hopefully all good. Sorry for the technical difficulties. And for the next hour or so, we'll be answering some of the questions you have about the project. We were reading your comments, and the number one comment that people may have been asking was, well, how can you build your own? And so if you didn't catch the video that we released this morning on the channel, the files for building your own version of the Frontier are now available. The links should be in the description of that video. You can check it out on the channel or Bethesda's blog. But the model in front of us, that 12-inch model of the Frontier, you can resin print or, yes, FDM print your own as well. But for the next hour or so, we have questions from the chat, questions from tested members, some sent ahead of time. We'll get started right in. We're going to talk about answer all your questions of how this thing was made, how we filmed the series, all the things that you may not have seen, that may not made the final cut. But maybe we'll start for the question from Ryan Peck. Ryan says, in the videos, the timeline was fairly condensed. It was about a 5-episode build series that we did. But were there any failures along the way that threatened the timelines? I think this may be a general question about what that timeline was like.
Sure.
So anyone want to take that?
Well,
start?
I think we should just say, no, those videos were in real time. It only took us 5
Everything
hours.
went perfect.
Yes.
Well, we'll start at the beginning. So it was about 100 hours of model work to get it to where it could be printable and be put together. There, I know we got a lot of comments of we were calling things wrong or other things like that. And we got this in advance of the footage coming out and all that stuff. And they were very busy with getting all that together. So it took a little while until we got all of our reference and everything like that. So we didn't know what to call things. We didn't know what we didn't know what color the paint.
You did
all
amazing.
That stuff,
I was calling things
yeah.
oh, well, let me see the butt. And you're it's an engine thruster or something like that.
Yeah.
It's the butt.
So about 100 hours and then printing was oh man, that was like a solid 2 weeks of printing, and we had some print problems, and Formlabs ended up having to help us out and print some stuff for us because we started doing the math, and because when you're doing these gigantic prints like this that take like days to print, when you have a problem, whether it's like you didn't have it supported enough or there's just a general print fail or anything like that, then you're behind like 4 days. And so we started doing the math and we're like, there's no way we're going to get this printed in time. So Formlabs printed a bunch of stuff for us and FedExed it out to us and all that. So that was a little scary. Got it all together. And then I think assembly overall went fairly well.
Yeah. As we were planning, I think we knew that the fun part for you guys to watch would probably be the assembly, getting the team together, using this space, which is the tested studio, and turning it into a working workshop. We visited, and you worked in Tip Studios. We've worked in been to a variety of different effects houses before, and we want to emulate some of that feel, but do it our way with the printers that we had here, with Adam guiding us. And it was about 3 weeks of building.
Yeah. And that was for the cockpit and the
full
scale.
The cockpit here and this scale. Sean, you want to talk a little bit about how we ended up at this scale and this being the size that we ended up making the ship at?
Honestly, a lot of the times that I figure out scale is I go by the printer that we're going to use and like how big it is. So I broke it down into what would be the biggest part that we'd have to do in one piece. And actually in that, it was 2 different passes for the cockpit, the large cockpit in this. So I think originally we based it on the hab, which is the main body part. And originally we were going to be printing it in one big piece. And so we figured out, I kind of scaled it up what I could fit on the Formlabs 3L. And that was pushing the max. And then we just kind of based it off of that. So it came up with about 2.5 feet, which was the sweet spot. And that just seemed like a nice build size also.
Yeah.
And then we kind of did the same thing at the cockpit. We figured out like how big could we go and still fit it on the printer okay, without having to chop it up into a million pieces.
A lot of things ended up working for us just almost by sheer luck. Bethesda provided us with the digital files, and that's what this morning's video, if you watch the channel, is about. You dive deep into converting a game file into a 3D printable file, but it turned out some of the details, like the cockpit, so much internal geometry that we wanted to make something bigger to actually showcase that. And this absolutely showcases not only the modularity of the ship, but all the detail the artists that worked on this put in it.
Yeah. And I think part of the cockpit was also like, this was our scale for the pilot's chair. And we realized even at this was challenging, like to get it all printed out without beefing up like everything on it. So, yeah. And then we did the shoot.
Yep.
And we had a few hiccups there.
You guys want to talk about some of that shoot? So the final episode we did of this build was going down to Orbital Studios down in LA and having a motion control shoot. And you guys, Kate, you've worked on filming miniatures before. It's a very natural environment for you, but for a lot of us, it was the first time seeing a miniature like this be filmed. So how was that, and how's trying to get everything done basically a day of filming?
It was a lot of fun. It was really exciting. It was sort of like showing up at camp and everybody's just like, all right, let's do this. This is going to be fun. But then there were also some serious aspects of it. So that first day we showed up and we were just going to get everything prepped. We weren't going to try and film anything. But in the process of unpacking the model and going through all our materials, we realized that we were missing some parts. They were like near the pile of stuff that came down and they just didn't come with it. So we had that moment of like, okay, what can we make do without it? And then like the simplest thought of like, okay, we're going to like call somebody, have them break into someone's house, find the spare keys, break into here, grab the stuff, and then overnight ship them. And it worked.
Yeah, everything worked out okay. Yeah. We got it was the landing gear. We were missing the retracted landing gear that was like a last minute thing. That was like, we were working on this, and we're going to shoot. And I was like, you know what, we really should have retracted landing gear if this is flying through space. So this was very last minute, and we just missed it when we brought everything down. And then Adam had made the steel arm that it would mount to the robot arm, and we forgot it. And so he found another rod, and he's outside the studio with a storm drain, using it to bend the rod. I think I got some pictures somewhere. I'll post this.
We filmed
Well,
it.
like-
Didn't make the final cut of the video. But
Yeah,
that was the kind of like
You did it.
problem solving on the
Wow.
fly that we
Yeah.
had to do.
Yeah.
and that's where I was really glad to have Adam, because he's just used to that. Like he's like, oh, okay, something went wrong, and it's just in his nature to figure it out. So like he didn't get flustered about it at all. But it all worked out great. We got everything done in the 2 days that we had, and we're happy.
And a thank you to Victor, who ended up doing some custom machining for us.
Yes.
Yeah, that was
Victor
clutch.
visited and
Yeah.
went, drove to his shop.
Oh,
did some
That
machining.
that's actually a good story.
Absolutely.
So once we got the replacement rod, and Adam had milled a really nice clamp that is inside the model that would clamp down on the rod and hold it in place. And we were torquing it down because it has to be really tight. This is a heavy model, and we're torquing it down. And Adam's just like, uh-oh. And we stripped the threads out completely. And we're like, oh no. So we had Adam's friend Victor was visiting, and he's like, well, my shop's like 30 minutes away. I could run over in it. So he ran home, milled a new block, came back, and we got it on. And then the bad part about that is to get to the clamp, to reinstall the clamp, we basically had to we had to take this all apart. And the hab is in two halves that sheath the big metal core block that gives it its strength. And Mel had run a whole bunch of wiring through all that for all the different little lights and thrusters and everything like that. And we're sliding the halves back together, and the metal block caught a wire, just sliced through like 3 of them.
Completely
And we're
shit.
just like, oh God, no. So then Mel and I are like, ah, like,
It was like at that point, like electrical tape. We're just like, okay, we're gonna just tie these things together, electrical tape it down, solder what we can, and then make it work.
and I knew that we would have to do some stuff like that. So when I was designing this, I did a lot of like, this has to unscrew, this has to come apart, we need access to this. And I think I did a pretty good job of that, but there were like in some of the wiring cases, we had places to route it, but it wasn't easy to route. So like the wire had to go like in the top, go wrap around the block, come out the bottom. And like, so we had like, I think we're using cable ties, like to thread it through and then pull the wires through. And like, it was a little nerve wracking.
We were learning.
This is
lessons
why I don't
as
like
we're going.
production.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get really stressed.
In that day, the time became our most precious resource.
Yeah,
How much time we
yeah,
had left at the studio. We knew we had to make something happen, and so it's about the realm of the possible, narrowing to get our shot. And as much preparation as we could have had beforehand, and you did a tremendous amount, Sean, in engineering this.
Exactly.
And to address, I know a lot of comments were asking about the thrusters, and we didn't know the thrusters were supposed to angle for a flying shot, for example. Like, we were only given so much information about the design of the ship.
Game footage yet, and we didn't even get concept art for a little bit. So we had no idea that the thrusters rotated. So and that would have been awesome. To be honest, even if we knew, I don't know if I would have had the time to engineer that one other thing, but like it would have been cool. But yeah, we did what we could.
I want to give a shout out also, made it appear in the video, but Joey did so much work in pre-production of storyboarding the sequence. So we went into Orbital Studios with an idea of these were the shots that we wanted to have. And Joey actually did an animatic, a previs shot using a cardboard ship he fabricated at home. And we filmed a segment where he and Adam had a conversation looking over what he shot, and you see glimpses of it. But what ended up being in the final film was basically shot for shot, close to what Joey put together. And I think it's on our YouTube short channel as well. There's a behind the scenes piece about that, so you can check that out. Mel, we have a question for you. One of the big questions coming out of this, Shaggy Justin, as well as I think Alistair Gilbert asked, what happened to the OLED panels?
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
So-
oh my gosh.
Let's talk about the OLED panels.
So it was the scale. The scale was just unfortunately for the actual cockpit was too small. So the screens were just a shy too big. And even when we scaled it up, because we tried to do like, hey, what if we just had another model where it was just the cockpit itself and see if we could fit the screens in? It was just simply still too small. And so the alternative that we ended up having to go with was either we put micro LEDs in, and then there was also like Adam had these really cool edge lit panels. that we ended up using then for some of the screens on the display. But like, yeah, I was like equally as bummed because it was just like, be so cool to have this tiny OLED screen as like a monitor and be like the actual monitor of stuff.
I know somebody out there is going to say, well, some dude made a Lego computer with a screen. And yes, there are time, but it was a time factor. It was a time and sourcing thing. Like we just didn't have time to track down what we truly needed and all that stuff.
Yeah, it was like the tiny TVs were so cute. And
yeah,
we
they are really, really cool.
The tiny circuits make those, and those are 1-inch OLED panels, and we were given the animations for the control panels. So it'd been really cool to put that in, but even to the scale, like the biggest panel we had was maybe like 1/3 of an inch in diagonal.
And then you have to modify the model a lot to accommodate the thickness of it and all. And so it just we ran out of time.
We didn't tell. We printed the chair, the 2x size, but even that one, it was still too small. Well, you mentioned though, it was one of those things that I think a very typical Adam story where we were chatting in the cave about it, and he just happened to have a bag of these lights that he had purchased just because he wanted to use them, and there are these flat panel LED lights. So imagine a tiny micro LED illuminating across a rectangle that you can cut that rectangle to any size you want and still get an even diffuse light, and that's what we ended up putting behind these, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it was nice because then you don't actually have to see, like sometimes with those tiny LEDs you just see like it as obvious, and this one gave it a nice even spread, which is really cool.
Continuing question from Lee Marsh asks, were you surprised how well the lighting worked when the model was filmed, and what was your process to design that lighting?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I'm always a little surprised just because like I'm a little bit of a nervous Nelly, but in terms of like designing the lighting system, I went with how bright can we make it and also how wide of a spread, especially for like the thruster lights. So you want them to be like very powerful for the shot. And so I figured I can always temper it down to being less bright, but not the other way around. So for all of them, I basically sourced it based off of form factor as well as like brightness and spread and yeah, it was basically going down a list and just kind of checking out components and then sort of prototyping based off of that. And then consulting with Sean and basically being like
back and forth, like I'd be like, Mel, you have this much space to put like so you have to pick stuff based on that too.
Yeah, totally. And so it was good because Sean actually gave me in the early stages gave me some of the components and parts, and so then I was able to just like throw them on and actually just see how it visually looked before we put them into the final mini.
That's a really good point too, that I started realizing that, and I've worked with, there's different types of people, and like it's really easy to lose perspective when you're all digital. Like it's like things that are microscopic on the actual models, like this is huge, this is fine, or whatever. And so like I realized you needed to have the thing in your hand. You needed to be able to look at it and like put a light in it and see how it was going to work. And like measurements only went so far. You actually need to have the thing.
Totally. And I also have to give a shout
out to Daryl because I worked pretty extensively with him for this particular model. And so I actually got the I CAD'd out like the specs for the micro LED because it's a standardized package. It's an 0805 SMD package. And he went in there and we basically went from screen grabs and he just made holes specifically so we could place them in. So that was a really cool, like pre-planned thing that worked out in the end.
Yeah. We should give a shout out to Daryl Maloney also.
Yes, 100%.
When we were talking about the timeline of the project and what we wanted to do, and I was like, Norm, there's no way I can get both done. I don't even know if I can get the ship done in time. So Daryl, who's done work with us before, he was free and he did all of the cutaway work and the beefing up in the 3D print design for the cockpit section because it wouldn't have got done otherwise.
And going back to the cockpit section, one of the questions and comments that we got were, why didn't we model it to be a 3/4 cutaway? You know, we printed this out as a half cutaway, and why did we have to go do this physical modeling? And I think the answer to that is we never know until, like you said, until you see the printed part, the physical part. Yeah. As much as you can imagine it looking cool or having an idea, you go into it, you want to be flexible enough in this type of model making that when you see the thing, you're going to have new ideas and roll with it. And when Adam saw how we printed the whole cockpit, a full 360, he immediately gravitated toward what if it was a 3/4 cutout.
Yeah, and part of it is even to do if we were to model and print a cutaway, you have to model and engineer all that stuff, which takes more time. So sometimes it's just easier, like when you're in such a crunch like this, just like, because you could design one side, mirror it, and then just print them both identically. And that was far faster than trying to model it exactly like it needed to be. And then Adam, like you said, Adam had more stuff to work with then and figure out what he wanted to do.
And we're making just the one. It wasn't like we need to model it, print out, a dozen of them. Yeah. Kayte, why don't we talk about some of the painting and finishing, your area of expertise here. Can you talk about some of your favorite parts in the weathering and the painting of these?
One of the things, obviously, that was a lot of fun was honestly just watching Adam go a little bit crazy with it, because this is something that I spend a lot of my time doing and I enjoy it very much. But I think Adam was so excited to get to put the time in on something like this, and normally he doesn't get to. So his joy and enthusiasm was positively infectious. And like, having him run over and be like, I just weathered this part. What do you think about it? And I'm like, it looks beautiful. He's like, really? I'm like, of course it does. Like, it looks so good. And then that would make me up my game and go, well, I got to make mine look as good as Adam's did. So that was a lot of fun. I particularly enjoyed the washes, I think, because when we first started this, even getting the paint on it, you're like, oh, it's starting to look more like a spaceship now, like as you get the colors on. But it doesn't really come to life until you get those bits on there. So once we started getting some of these darker weathering in on the main body, I started to see it. I started to see the finished image in my head. I mean, I love the way these, again, I've been calling them the butts. I don't know what they're called. I love the way these look now, but I can say they were not my favorite part to do, because there were so many, like this was a separate mask. This was a mask. This was a mask. This was a mask. This was a mask. Then water slide decals and vinyl Cricut cutouts. So these weren't like a ton of fun to make, but the end result was definitely worth it.
I gotta say, I was really impressed and surprised watching you guys, because coming from growing up building models, there's everything's spray painted, airbrushed or spray painted, and I understand why, because it just turns out so much better than trying to hand paint it with brushes, and I was really impressed with that.
We got a lot of comments from people saying, why wasn't the whole thing airbrushed? And I suppose it's a valid question, right? One of the constraints I was working under was the fact that, I don't know if you see how many pieces there are here and how many different colors that there are used, and the time and effort it takes to continuously change out an airbrush for when you're switching in between colors. And then I don't know about anybody else, but when you're working with an airbrush, sometimes it just stops working. Like, it's guaranteed to happen a few times on any given job I'm on. So in this, since it is so modular, it was like, okay, we're going to rattle can absolutely everything we can. Then anything that we can't rattle can, we're going to do with the airbrush, we're going to do by hand. And I think it came out really well. Another benefit of that is that you get really good consistency. You have, the Tamiya spray paints are as thin and buttery as you could possibly ask for. So there was no mixing of anything involved in that. I think it came out really nicely.
What did you use for your washes on the main body?
So I used, Adam has some weathering that he really likes that is an acrylic based weathering. I think he also added in a little bit of an oil wash. I tended to stick with an acrylic and water, or acrylic and alcohol based wash that I then sort of wiped a bunch up as well.
He was a shared pool. He created a mix of this was our dirty wash for the big pieces, and because it was divvied up where you were doing some, Adam was over at the cave doing some, with make sure that there was consistency. It was easier when he was doing individual components, which he had a lot of fun with. But once it came together, then that's why he came over here toward the end of it, and there was a whole day of just you two
Yeah.
weathering here.
Well, and then there's an interesting component there, right? Because the way I weather something and the way you weather something are going to be totally different. So then when you bring those two pieces together, you're like, they don't look the same. They weren't in the same weather. So then you have to do work of removing some of yours and adding some more here and there, and then maybe taking a new color and unifying everything together with that. So it was kind of a fun challenge.
Keith had been in, I didn't call it, both the same questions. Following up on that is, when do you stop? How did you and I know when to stop with the weathering?
When they tell me that my car is going to be towed outside and they pry me away. Yeah, that's a really hard one because you do want to keep going. I will say there were times when I went too heavy, and when I stepped back and I looked at it and go, no, that's not right. So I went in and I used alcohol and a rag, and I started removing a bunch of the weathering I did. And in fact, I think I came out with a better result when I did that, because you get heavier stuff in some places and lighter stuff in another. So it's just one more step to it. But I think it has to be, when your heart tells you.
Well, you guys are even adding weathering on set.
We were, of course, because there's a huge difference between what it looks like under these lights and what it looks like on the set lights through a camera lens.
My favorite is when you guys started drawing panel lines on with pencil.
Yeah.
Like it looks amazing. Like I can't, even sitting right here, I can't tell that.
Well, and a hot tip of anybody, I mean, I don't know if any of you are going to be filming your models, but we had some vinyl sheets of, what we were calling greeblies, just random cutout shapes. We brought our extras with us to set so that when we looked through that camera lens on the monitor and we saw that particular spot on the ship and we go, it looks naked here. We need a little something. You just have your stuff right there to dress right to camera.
Yeah. And those are sheets of a variety of colors, red, yellows, whites, of triangles, circles at different sizes.
Yes.
Again, experimenting with what looks right for the scale. Yeah.
They
And
turned out good.
we did have more than one can of insignia white. It was on our first test day that we only had the one can.
Yeah.
Sean actually called the local hardware store, the Ace Hardware over in the East
There's
Bay,
one
and
place in
Yeah.
town you can get to me.
emptied them out
Yeah.
to bring all the insignia white back in.
Also, when I was putting together the print guide for this, I wanted to include the colors that we had. So I contacted Kate and I was like, can you just give me a list of what paints you use? And she sends me a whole email of like photos of the can of paint next to the part that is painted with. I was like, of course.
I mean, if anybody needs that kind of advice, I will freely give it to you now. I have worked on jobs where, say, I made this model. 3 months from now, we've all forgotten what we did. And say Bethesda came back to us and said, we need a second one right now. And I go, I don't remember a single color I used. I don't remember anything about this job. So when I do a project, say I, have painted this main body, right as soon as I'm done, I set the can down, I'm holding the part, I take a picture of it so that I have a reference of all the different parts, what colors they were, what brand it was, exactly what we need.
Question about model making in general. David Farron asks, is it easier to paint and finish a smaller or larger model for someone who may be just starting?
Oh, for someone just starting, I would say start small because it's a lot more manageable and you can get away with tiny details doing a lot of the work. I think that, say you had, like a little, what's the tabletop game that people paint the figures of? Warhammer. So you had a little Warhammer figure, you're going to have a lot easier time making certain things right. It's like, okay, this is the skin, this is the cloth color, this is their weapon, and that's good enough. As soon as you start to get better, you're going to have to worry about every single little detail, where that weathering falls, like if it's realistic looking, it's going to be a little bit harder. But I mean, otherwise just start with whatever's in front of you. Just start, just do it.
Sean and Mel, we have a question about the wiring. That's something that you two worked on. Once we got the first base coats on here and we're sending parts over for Adam and Kate to paint, you guys started tidying up the wiring. Can you talk about the routing design and how you made this something that you could also jump into and tune if need be, and how it was hidden?
Oh yeah. So I mean, we made a lot of especially for the thrusters, we made that all fairly modular with some JST plugs, just because we knew that we were going to be transporting this and we were going to have to disassemble it to a certain degree. And then the rest was sort of like what we were talking about, which is snaking through cabling. There is a couple of Wago clips in there. A lot of it was sort of set to be modular for the purpose of like if we needed to service on the job, we could.
And we did, this is something I've done a lot with other electronics jobs, like with the electronics person, where we had to figure out where to put all the electronics.
Yes.
So we had a printout of this. I gave this to Mel because the cowl was where I was picturing that it could be. And I originally was picturing like the docking ring, which comes off, would have maybe switches or something under it. But you crammed in as many boards as you could and figured it out. And then we laser cut little panels that fit in there to hold them.
Yes.
And that, I guess the space constraints somewhat dictated what you could use.
Basically, yeah, like
board-wise.
Board-wise, I ended up having to use a very compact board. I think it was an Adafruit.
It was one of the Adafruit like tiny boards. And then, and like, again, like we had some relays and all that. I was a little nervous we couldn't fit it in, but like, luckily this was cavernous enough where we could just like sloop them all in and like kind of tether them down.
Yeah. I would say in as far as routing, most of the parts were hollowed for printing's sake and weight's sake. And then one of the most important things with resin printing is having drain holes everywhere to prevent suction from happening in the resin vat and for allowing cleaning it out and all that. So that also worked well for routing wires. So sometimes I'd put a little extra holes in where, like I basically just put holes wherever I could that would be hidden. And then we drilled a lot of holes. So some stuff we did after the fact. And honestly, I think routing the wiring was pretty okay in most of the hollow parts without any particular accommodations other than the hab where the block was.
Yeah.
That was tricky. And in hindsight, I wish I would have modeled in some specific wire routing for that, but we made it work.
We did.
Yeah. And then the other thing is just like putting screws and parts that could come off wherever I could, put plugs wherever you can. Because then it makes it a lot easier if you need to service it or take it apart or swap out the landing gear or any of that kind of stuff. So any place that we could, we put plugs.
Yes.
Now, what about connecting this, not only powering it on location when we're filming it, but you have multiple wires coming out. Can you talk about where that second wire went so it can be controlled by the operator?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So because we had this robot arm for the motion control, it meant that we could do fun things like have the robot arm control when these lights turn on. And so I ended up adding an extra circuit in here that basically acts as like a silent relay to trigger the lights. And the cabling, like it was fairly straightforward. We could fit it inside and then the cabling could easily snake out from the side that was not being viewed by the camera. And that basically then went all the way out to the robot arm and the operators, we tested it and it like worked and stuff. And it was kind of exciting just because like, yeah, you have so much more control with that.
Well, that was another twist on this shoot because originally the ship was going to be on a very simple rotating platform and the camera was going to be on the robot arm.
Yes.
And then when we got there, we realized that wasn't going to work. And then all of a sudden the ship had to be on the robot arm. We were like,
that was very precarious.
Because I was like, I hope, because this is all held on with magnets. And I was like, I hope that stays on. And then you had a giant extension cable that you had to have going down the arm. And
the beauty of this,
we had a ton of cables. Yeah. So it was able to just easily snake and make more. And again, like the power of Wago clips, people, or just like little connectors, like they can help you on a pinch. You can just extend out. I wasn't really sure how long these cablings were going to be. So I ended up just making them extra long on purpose. And then we ended up actually trimming down a bunch just to fit in things properly. So make your cabling long. Because you can always cut that down. You can't really.
Yeah, always have extras on hand.
Exactly.
One other just kind of funny thing, because this has gotten me on other projects. I think we both love silicone wiring. Mm-hmm. The silicone sheath, it's very flexible. It's heat resistant. It strips really nice. You don't melt it when you're soldering. But then you give it to the model maker. Talk about that, Kate.
Totally.
You know, funny enough, not a lot of people know this. Nothing sticks to silicone.
Yeah. So every time that we've done that, and I've done it on a few projects, it's like Kayte's like, I can't paint this.
Yeah, I can't paint it, can't glue it. I don't know what to do with it.
So
bounces around.
Yeah.
we did have we had the standard red and black wiring, and when we did it down here in the landing mounts and everything, we're like, oh, you can kind of see the red wires. So
It's just like Sharpie it.
Mel was sharpieing it, and like as soon as if you just looked at it funny, the Sharpie all came off in your hand. So
Yeah.
so silicone wire, great, not so great if you want to use it on a model such as this.
Yes.
Sean, for people printing their own, like the 12-inch model or any type of large ship that maybe multiple components, what tips do you have for how to get it so that it's stable if they want to mount it somewhere, or that you also don't have warping over time, for example?
Oh, geez. That is so you don't get generally, I find you don't have too much warping problems with like FDM prints, so filament prints are usually a bit better about that. It is the bane of my existence for resin models, and it's been a really big learning curve. I did some, I actually helped with some ships on Picard. My buddy Bill Krause designed the Titan, which is in season 3. And before that, he did some Ready Room models, like the gold Ready Room models. And getting Trek ships not to sag is really, really hard.
Designed for 0G.
Yeah, and I have had many models where I screwed that up. Like, and I got like after a while, like the very first really big 3D model that I designed in grad school is like Mr. Droopy. Everything's sagging on it. So with resin models, a lot of times there's a few things I'll do. I'll make the walls relatively thick, like so. Most of the walls on this are 1.8 to 2 millimeters thick. Putting ribs in will help a lot. That'll keep things from buckling in. And if you watch the build series, we had some problems on the cargo bay with that, where I didn't put enough ribs in. And that's just like, if you look inside like any plastic thing, there's like ribs and reinforcement to make it strong. And the windows on the cargo hold were bulging out. So we had to reprint with more ribs in there, and I'll put metal in wherever I can. So like there's a lot of places on this where we, like in the landing gear, we put steel rods in. So I modeled holes down the length of the landing gear that a rod would slide in to keep them from getting bendy. It can be really, really challenging to combat that, but I'd say metal rods a lot of the times, thicker walls, ribs are all things that will help towards that, but it's still a challenge to this day for me.
Kayte, what about some of the final detailing, like the vinyl and the decal application? Can you talk about how the order of operations for that stuff and how that meshed with the weathering?
So we did initially have intentions of, we would do some weathering, we would apply like our water slide decals and maybe some of the vinyl, and then do more weathering on top so that they have the same amount of weathering as the rest of the ship. We definitely found that our water slide decals were not sealing properly. So if you tried to go back on top and do weathering on them, they were just going to either like crumble or peel off. So we had to modify that a little bit. One of the things you're really supposed to do with water slide decals is like seal them down. And we just didn't have the time or like logistical ability to do that in context of this big ship. So we did as much weathering as we could, then added a bunch of our decals and our vinyl, and then anywhere that we could just very gently put some weathering on top of that. I'll say this, I'm not in any hurry to do water slide decals again soon. I really do not care for them. I don't know if I just haven't met the right one yet. I don't know if maybe there's a brand or a technique that works different, but I just never enjoyed that process. It always feels like, I have a term that I use when you're working with a material and you have to make it do something you want. You have to basically trick it into doing what you want. You have to like sneak up on it, and like, you can't just apply it the way that the instructions tell you to. You have to like sneak up and sort of sneakily get it in there.
Was part of that also that we were printing our own custom water slides versus like using like ones out of like a model kit?
I mean, I would say that probably is a factor, because in my experience, I do have less problems with ones that I get in kits. none of them are fun. I just don't like it.
Yeah, 'cause
Go
we were-
ahead, come at me with your hatred. I
Yeah.
just don't like water slide decals.
Because we were able to grab some of the textured maps and stuff from the kit, so we were printing on our.
It was a
our-
mix, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was a time constraint thing also.
Yeah.
We actually, Sean and I looked online for Gundam kits,
Yeah.
and they sell decal packs, generic numbers, shapes, and things that evoke a vibe. Because one of the things that I don't think we got was like a font package. They actually had texture packages with individual numbers, but you couldn't type out what you wanted.
Yeah.
You'd have to like copy and paste. That's how the graphic artists work. So we ended up making our own with a printer that we had, bought some,
Just
off
trying
the
to
shelf.
match stuff as
Exactly.
close as we could.
And it was a mixture of cropping some of those textures to actually taking screenshots. So
Yeah.
one of the things that Bethesda provided was like this, minutes long turnaround video of someone flying around a ship
Yep.
in lighting, and maybe change up the lighting a little bit. But that was our like grail,
Yeah.
holy grail for.
I still
Well-
see it spinning in my
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah.
It's on a loop.
And then a lot of these are just like little custom shapes that you did on the
Yeah,
vinyl. Like
yeah.
you did in
Yeah.
Illustrator and then put them in the vinyl. On the vinyl.
That's right. Yeah. And then you would come over and say, for this part, I think on this, we'd look at the TV and say, okay, it needs to fill up this much space. We get the calipers and say, give me this decal at 0.25 inches. And I, print out 8 of them, and you use whatever you need.
Yeah, that was really great having Norm as like the resource for that, or coming to him and saying, "What do I need here?" Because maybe there was actually more going on in the shot on the original ship, but we were able to take that, take a step back and say, "Well, what does your eye actually draw to? We're only going to call out the biggest things, the most important parts. Let's just do this one, and this one," and then we could say, "Well, I have this much space," and he got it all for us.
Any advice for people who want to paint and finish the 12-inch version?
Ooh.
Yeah, I think like decals, for example, probably would not scale. It's
Yeah.
2.5 times smaller. So there are some things that actually
Tough.
like the paint mask, for example.
Yeah.
We documented that in the video, but that was a fun story of you generating that paint mask for the bottom of the thruster,
And
Sean.
I still messed up the picture.
But see, I do think you would have some issues, say, using vinyl. Like, if you really wanted to be nitpicky, the vinyl already blows scale on this. I think it works for what we wanted it for. But if you tried to use it on this tiny guy, it would definitely, it's like a full step. I don't know if you were to scale it up, it would be a few inches tall is what you would get from that. So you might have to do a lot more physical hand painting or physical masking and painting of each detail if you really didn't want to get too much surface difference there.
Would you maybe do a negative paint mask instead?
Yeah.
Use the vinyl cutter, and you used a Cricut a ton. What's the smallest thing you can cut? Like making a paint mask on a vinyl cutter.
I have done things much smaller than my pinky nail. I've definitely done things that were single letter cutouts that were maybe under an 1/8 of an inch, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. So it can get there. It might be a little spindly, but make sure you use your extra strong cutting mat to hold down some of those details that you're cutting out. But you can get pretty small. Otherwise, on a ship like this, again, thinking of what we were saying is, what's your eye going to be drawn to, and working in something a small scale, just go for general blocks of shapes and colors, right? So over here, you've got different decals and different shapes. You don't need to have the writing on any of those decals because you're not going to be able to read it anyway at that scale. I can barely read this at this scale. So just think of it, this no longer is a decal, this is a shape. So all you have to do is block that out and hand paint it or spray it on there as, a square or a oval or whatever that shape is. Everything's going to become a shape on something this small.
Fine, but if you could track down any dry transfer decals, those are really, 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 really thin, and you might be able to cut some little pieces out of that and that'd help with the scale somewhat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of sealing it.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
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 Clear
And
coats, clear coats.
the little guy is pretty much the same piece as this, so it is meant that you can paint the pieces individually and then put it together.
That's
Which
something
I
very
would
good
recommend.
point. You had it assembled here for a video,
Yeah.
but paint them separately so you can get all the undersides.
Be a lot easier.
Yeah, so much easier. Mel, what about lighting for lighting a smaller version?
Oh, I mean, okay, so the so the micro LEDs, maybe you'd be able to
You
fit
see it?
in. This is so tiny, little tiny guy. Yeah, so I feel like your best bet is micro LEDs, pretty much similar to the ones in this particular model. You can find them easily on Amazon. They're usually there's two types of packaging. One of them is going to be a little bit brighter than the other. One is like 0805, and then there's one that's 0605. 0605 is going to be smaller. So I would start with the 0805 and just see, because I feel like you could easily fit like a couple in the actual thrusters here. And the ones down
I
here.
did leave holes in all the nozzles, so you could.
Yeah, so you can have them like, have the kind of effects.
And we talked.
The release video for these, but one option you could do is you could print the whole cockpit in clear, and then I included the vector files for making the paint masks for that, and you could mask off the cockpit,
Which is what we did here.
and paint it, and then you could stick a LED in the back.
inside. Yeah, that would be cool too.
Yeah.
And then they all run off of like 3
volts or so you can easily have like a button battery. I would you're going to be working with really thin gauge, which is just never it's there's a technique to it. You'll kind of get used to it. I use sometimes like scissors, or like they do have like wire strippers that go down to something like 30, but you just have to be somewhat delicate, and then you solder a bunch and you practice.
Bend those.
I think you might be able to even fit
Two like double or triple A's in the cowl or the cargo bay, so you can have some power.
So you just like snake them all together, put some resistors in there. Well, you don't have,
I would say just always current limiting resistors are always good to have on hand, and then snake them in, find a really good spot to put the battery, and then you can have a little switch thing that turns it on and goes poop.
That'd be cool.
So,
Also,
I saw a lot of questions in the video for the files that can it be FDM printed?
Yeah.
And the answer, this was optimized for resin printing because that's the files that I started with, and the amount of detail on this, that was the easiest for me to do in the time that we had, and to capture that amount of detail. So the base files, the hollowed out files, are not ideal for FDM, but I did include solid files in a subfolder in there, so they're not hollow, they don't have drains in them, but all the keys are there, so you could mess around with that. And I suspect that if you scaled it up a little bit, you could probably get a decent FDM print, especially since it's broken out into so many parts.
I already see people saying they want to import it and texture it themselves and do some animation.
Cool.
And
I hope
They can do that. The mesh is a mess. But I wish you luck.
what about tools for people? If they have a resin printer and they're printing this out, what tools may they want to mod it, to clean it up, to drum the holes in them, to wire it?
So I cleaned most of these parts. Sean prepped most of them. But there were some. I'm very fidgety about print lines. So I thought everybody was. It turns out maybe it's just me. But I go way over the top. And my number one tool that I used in cleaning this up, because there's so many organic shapes, is if any of you saw my favorite things video with my foam sander that has Velcro on the front. And you can pull off and put on new strips of different grit of sandpaper. I use that for pretty much all of this. So I highly recommend that, plus a set of diamond files, like precision files, especially when you're having to get into a lot of these nooks and crannies on these tiny things. That's going to really help you. Maybe on this small, a pin vise, if you do need to drill out some holes, or one of those small battery operated Dremels with like the tiny tips, right?
Sean, any recommendations for tools from your tool set that you use?
It doesn't apply to this one as much as it did this guy, but I really, really like step bits for anytime you need to drill into stuff, particularly plastic and metal, because particularly with hollowed out resin pieces, I find if you use a standard twist bit on your drill, it can grab the plastic and either shatter it or it goes spinning in your hands. So step bits are awesome because They do a really nice clean cut, and they're exactly what they are. They're steps so that you can just like, oh, that's not quite big enough. You drill, you just keep going down. And they do a nice clean job on both metals and plastics. And we use it extensively on this guy. Won't need it quite as much on this, but a regular like the pin vise or whatever would be good. Yeah.
For like paint tips on the small one, obviously Adam was using a lot of his Molto chrome pen for these accents. If you can't find one, or if you don't have one around, like available at a store near you, some of these, like these struts up here, I actually, not these top ones that are extra shiny, but the more dull ones, I used a silver Sharpie. Now it's not going to hold up as well. You might need to put a top coat on it, and it won't have the same like chrome effect, but you are able to very quickly do tiny details with something that you likely have laying around. And if you're working on a model this small, let's hope that it's not going to be handled too much anyway, because it's going to be delicate. So that's a good cheat.
That was a thing too. Adam would be and we'd be so impressed when he added that multichrome to these metal parts, because it made them look like multi-material.
Yep.
It made this print look like it was, you know, flat finished with high gloss. But once he did a clear coat, we just haven't found the right combination of clear coat and the Molto or of a chrome. It really dulls it down. So to see the day of and have the lights on it, it was just brilliant.
Also, if you're kind of intimidated by painting like I am, I think like Vallejo has a nice series of washes, both really thin stuff, and they also have this real thick goopy texture stuff like that you can duplicate like mud and stuff. And that's a good place to start if you just want something out of the box like that makes you feel like you're doing a good job. Like it's a good starting
Vallejo
point.
washes were what we used as a base for most of this.
Yeah.
Which was great because I didn't have to custom mix a color. I knew that anything he was doing, that, you know, like if Adam was doing anything with it, that it was going to come out the same color if I did something with it. So that was nice.
You should tell him about your USB soldering iron.
Oh yeah, so I borrowed Adam's USB soldering iron, which is quite lovely. I don't know if you would necessarily, it's just nice and portable. So the best part about that is it's like, you can just like, especially if you have like wiring in really awkward places and it would be, say, maybe challenging with a standard iron, you can kind of go sneak in. It was really awesome on site because there was just like, you know, you're on set and there is some space for extension cables, but it would be kind of a pain. So now you have this like portable thing that you can just like hobble over and then just quickly do a quick solder on.
And they can run off
drill battery.
Yeah, it was like
DeWalt battery.
yeah,
Exactly.
It's like a quantum leap. Like I'm used to, in my day, it was the portable soldering iron was the butane ones that were like this big and like terrible. So those things are amazing and they're like the size of a pencil.
Totally. And they
heat up really quickly, which is super nice. So you can just like be ready to go.
And you can dial in the temp.
Right.
Yes, you can dial in the
So
temp and
cool.
everything. Yeah, it's quite lovely. You can find them
Pretty easily on eBay. I just think if you look up just like USB soldering iron, you'll find them.
We'll include as many links after live stream, all the things we mentioned, so folks can find them. And then Rub and Buff, Kayte. So we had someone ask about your use of that. I know you're very excited to finally use one of the colors.
Yes.
Rub and Buff here.
So we've got our European gold up here, which honestly, I had a few different gold paint colors that I tested, and none of them came out the exact color I was thinking in the back of my head. And in the back of my head, I'm like, it's that Rub and Buff color that I really want. It's European gold. I was like, well, what if I just rubbed the Rub and Buff on there? So I masked this whole thing and then just applied Rub and Buff. So this is all Rub and Buff. I also got to use a really nice ebony Rub and Buff, which just brings a little sheen to it. And then here on these, okay, what are these, Sean?
Cannons.
I got to finally use Ruby Rub and Buff. And there's like, I've been waiting, I don't know, 15 years to use Ruby Rub and Buff on something. And
awesome.
I really like the color. Now you will get some texture out of it. I mean, this is an older one, so maybe that's why too, but there's some texture on this. So if you try to do it on here, it might mess with your scale, but do a test because this one has almost no texture to it. So
I think the grit actually adds to it. It makes one piece look like different panels.
Yeah.
And you know, Adam has used Rust-Oleum spray with textured spray. He's in his mini like proton packs. Like those would be great also.
And what did he use on the exterior of this model? Didn't he do some? He did spray.
Yes, he did,
77.
yes, glue
Yeah.
spray. Yeah, 3M
Spray
spray.
adhesive
That
Yes.
as
blew
your
my mind.
base,
Yes.
and then you paint over that so that you have this like really nice textured effect.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up on this project? When you think about this now, and that basically 2 months of modeling time, and the month we spent filming this, what are the things that you think most fondly about? What are things you wish you could, if you could go back and redo? What? Kate?
I was just saying this. If I could redo it, and if Bethesda was game for it, I would have said we're gonna come up with our own paint scheme, and then we do it, and then they have a custom tested skin
Yeah,
in
that
the
would've been
game.
awesome.
That's what I would have liked.
Awesome.
I don't know that would have at all been possible with them because that's a lot to do on their end. But that would have been the highlight of.
Yeah,
it
that
for
would have
me.
been sweet. I was very satisfying on any of these projects when you spend so much time in the digital realm and it actually prints out and everything fits together. It's both a oh god, thank God, and also like yeah, that's very satisfying. And it was like Adam gave me compliments, which was very flattering.
Nice working with you guys. Like, I was gonna say, it was just really awesome to have like basically what was like the super team for me, which was just like working with everybody and like on this awesome project together. So
Adam has said that
Figure out
before as
another
well,
Yeah.
right? Just coming into the studio and having it be a working studio,
Yeah.
and filming and all these things going on at the same
Yeah,
time.
and I think that should be fun. There's some people
You're
are
like, oh, this is sponsored content. It's a commercial. But like, I've never, like Adam, we were all having such a good time. And like, Adam was truly having fun.
Yeah.
And like, he loved having people in house again and like, and working as a team. And like, we truly had a really good time. It was a lot of fun.
Well, and just look at it this way: sponsored content is really just the ability to bring us all together to do a build of this
Yeah.
size. Because it's this
I mean, who doesn't
costs a
wanna-
lot of time and money to do this, and we can't just do it for fun.
Yeah.
There has to be something there. So, hey, more people come bring in money and let us do more crazy big group builds. Because all I want to do is work with you guys. Like.
Yeah, lovely.
It was great, like getting random texts from Adam, like out of nowhere, being like, "I love having you all in the office."
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming back to the office for this live stream and answering some
Absolutely.
questions that people had from watching the series. I also want to thank the viewers out there. Ryan Peck just donated some memberships, and thank you for the people who have gifted
Thank you.
memberships for our live streams. We'll be back with more live streams with Adam back in his workshop in the coming weeks. So stay tuned on the community tab for updates about that, as well as our social media, and download the model.
Yeah,
So
post your builds.
yes, post your
Yeah.
builds. We want to see, if you have a resin printer and you print out an FDM printer, paint it up. We'd love to see what people are doing with this model. I think we'll all be doing our own takes on this, once maybe we've got some distance from it. Yeah.
I definitely want to see different like color schemes and things that you come up with, especially if it's not something that's available in the game. Like tag me, let me know what you're doing. I want to see.
And we'll include links where you can find all the works of everyone here, Kate, Sean, Mel, and Tested here in the description below. Thank you all so much for joining for this special live stream. Thank you to Bethesda for making this project possible and making the files available. And thanks to Adam, of course, for bringing us all together for this. And we will see you all next time. Have a good one.